The second of our panels that this morning was beautifully themed, but as with the first one it's no longer themed, was about community. And the first of those talks are going to be Laura about running a club at school, a kids club.
And it's going to be way shorter and way less jazzy. I run a hobby club at my primary school for 7 to 11-year-olds. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now. Soon after I got indoctrinated into the hobby, I guess. And I kind of figured, well, if I'm doing it and learning from this basic level, I'm sure the 7-year-olds can do it, and they'll probably know more than me, and I've kind of been proved right. So it started out with about 8 boys in my classroom going, I really like nerdy stuff, and it has now descended into chaos with about 25, 30 kids coming in every Monday, every Tuesday. Can we do an extra painting session on a Thursday? Yeah, so I don't eat lunch anymore, but the kids are having a great time. So the core principles of the club were that, which is slightly different actually to some information that I had from some other people that already ran theirs. So things like Games Workshop sent me an email saying, oh, we suggest maybe a little weekly charge for your equipment in your club, or maybe limiting numbers because there's only one of you running it. And actually, I just kind of said, I'm going to keep it free because they're 7 to 11. They haven't got a lot of pocket money, so I'm going to beg, borrow and steal everything to try and get them into the hobby. Which has sort of worked. I'm a little poorer than I was before, and the model supply dwindles every once in a while, but we've been really lucky with really good community support. We've had a mass batch of goblins from Mr. Troke, which started a lot of kids into the hobby, and it's just been really nice to see the community pulling together, and I'll get on a little bit to how that's happened a little bit more recently. It's open to everybody. It's open to boys, girls, whoever that wants to come. They don't have to have access to their own models, they don't have to have painted before, they don't have to have played before, and they don't have to do everything. So if they want to come in and paint and not play, that's fine. If they want to come in and throw Poundland German war soldiers on a battle map, which they do frequently, and then go, this is Thor and Oakenshield, that's fine too. So it started with a goblin. When I started the club, Adam very kindly gifted us a load of goblins, and the kids just loved painting them. So we've had green ones and blue ones and rainbow coloured ones, and it was really easy to get them into.
Just be kidding me.
Thanks. It was really easy to get them started on something. Obviously, we just did a basic base coat and a wash, and they looked like goblins, and that was really exciting. So from there, we had a little trip to Games Workshop, to Lora Morle. And again, the kids loved that because they could see all these fancy models in cases, and then they had a little go at painting, and they tried to get involved in the hobby that way. They were pretty easy to paint and pretty easy to customise. So being a teacher, I put in some stealth maths and made them do numbery stuff. So one of the first things we did with the club was getting them to copy out the Tween chart and trying to work out the patterns with the numbers. And they loved that, and they didn't realise they were doing maths, so my job is done. And obviously a lot of them then went away and were like, oh, these models are really cool, where do they come from? I've not read the book. So they read the book. Again, it's kind of like teaching, but in my lunchtime. So then things took a dark turn. This was he named it Bloodbath. It was created by a 7-year-old. We had some words. I was like, this is cool, it needs more stuff. So he went away, he came back again. He created Goblin Raid Combo, which was excellent. So they like killing things, is what I've learned. There's a lot of models that I will never see again because they're under a layer of paint and sand on a strip of cardboard. It's apparently like a waste battleground type terrain situation. They've nicked my Pritt sticks to use as painting handles, so we don't use it to do our painting handles, we're fine. There's paint on all of my surfaces. The cleaner hates me, but the kids are having a good time, so it's fine, isn't it? And they really like mixing things up. So we've got some excellent terrain. So Ian Baldwin, his family gifted us some terrain, which is fab, so the kids get to play on that. And they really like to mix things up. So this was Thor and Oakenshield's company take on these things. So there was a little mixture. There was some space green in there. There's a loose Tyranid somewhere. And what I really like is giving them the freedom to create their own rules based on, obviously they've got access to the rule books in my classroom, but just giving them some kind of freedom to mess around with stuff. I think that is possibly where, with this age group, it's really important to let them be inventive and be creative with the way that they're playing the game. Obviously, where there is an opportunity to teach them about how the rules work, I've been doing that, but I think just letting them have fun and work out what their own kind of wound scores and things are is kind of fun. And it's really interesting to see how their minds work. And they do, once they've started reading the rule books, they do kind of weave things in that actually exist in the game, which is sometimes helpful. So we did struggle to attract girls to the club, probably because it was a room full of Year 6 boys and they were a bit smelly. But we've tried to kind of hopefully make it a bit more accessible. So I hoped that having me leading the club would do something, and it didn't really. So my whole first cohort of kids were all boys. So I invited the girls along to a painting session on their own, and that kind of worked a little bit. So they were, oh, well, it's just like art, isn't it? And I can paint stuff, and like, do I have to paint it a certain colour? No, you don't. Oh, okay, that's really cool. And the girls sort of gradually started feeding into, oh, can we come on a Monday when everybody else comes? And that's great too. Showing them lots of female painters on the internet really helps. So people like Louise Sugden that are doing amazing things with wacky colours, they love that. So yeah, making sure that we're kind of giving them those positive female role models of people that are actually in the game. Katrina gets a lot of airtime because she's on my Facebook and she's like, look what she's done, that's great. And then giving them that painting focus part, apart from the battling. Although having said that, my 2 girls that I have at the minute are the most bloodthirsty children you've ever met. So then there was this, a little off topic, but this happened. So this last week, one of my kids' models got smushed, and it was kind of upsetting. What was more interesting for me was not necessarily the incident that happened, but the reaction of the community that we are all in, and that was super exciting. So yeah, long story short, this girl has been painting this model for weeks, and it has been in a little safe space on my classroom shelf, and at some point somebody removed it from its safe space, took it out on the playground and stood on it. She was super upset, obviously, but the community were fab, and she's had some posts this week, and she's the most small child you've ever seen. And it's just that kind of loveliness of the community, and I think that's something really important I like to highlight to the kids, is like, you can go down to Warhammer World, and there will be somebody that will show you how to play, and there will be somebody that will talk to you, and there will be somebody that goes, hey, have you got this one? It's really cool. There were some other responses that I found interesting. So just for the record, not evil. Also not evil. Not evil. Potentially a little bit evil. There were some responses, obviously, about the evilness and the brutality of the child involved. The child involved was 7. Kids don't really know how to be evil at that point. I think it's a learned thing. So I started thinking about why maybe the child had stamped on the model. Was it because it was a girl and 7-year-old boys don't really like 7-year-old girls because they're different and they're weird? Is it the fact that she's better at painting than most of the boys in my club? Possibly. She works hard. She spends a lot of time in her free time painting. So maybe that was a factor. But fundamentally, it was thoughtless, and the kid didn't know that this plastic toy soldier, the same as the ones you see in a boxing Poundland for £1 for 50 of them, didn't know that that small soldier represented 5 weeks of Evie's work. So it was about sort of educating people about how the club works, and I think in a school that's quite easy to do, in a wider community, it's a bit different, and I think the reactions from the community showed quite a lot of people that have obviously experienced this growing up, and experienced that kind of, having people mock them for their hobby, or having people treat them differently for their hobby, and particularly at this kind of grassroots level, like I really want to stop that from happening. So we've done assemblies, and we've done, kids showing off their work and that kind of thing on a very small level, but I think it's obviously a much bigger thing, and I think what struck me was obviously not that kids are evil, but that people have been directly affected by that. So yeah, we'll keep working on a small scale, and hopefully that will filter out. So basically, running a club is awesome, and the kids really love it, and it's fab spending time having a nice time, kids sharing my hobby, and I love the fact that I get quizzed on the playground about what the most under points costed model is in the entire Hobbit book, and they read the book back to front and then quiz me on it, and I find that really tricky because I don't know, and I play this for fun, and I rely on Mr. Entwistle's brain, and I don't even know what his army looks like this weekend, which is fabulous. But it's that idea that they're really into it, and as much as long as they're into it, I can keep getting excited about playing the hobby, and they always bring in new models and they do shiny new things. There are a few things to remember though. Everything that you own will have a light dusting of Ripen Fleshshade or Nuln Oil, because they just open it and it goes, oh, I did that thing again. Can I get a cloth? No, it's stained. Everything's slightly red. Literally everything. The cleaner has had words several times, but I'm not stopping. Kids will have a cooler setup than you, and it might make you really sad, like this dragon. So this is Archie's kit, and he's like, do you mind if I bring in a couple of paints? Out falls like the 3 levels of things and the assortment of brushes and 6 paint handles. What is he painting? Nobody knows. So it's fab, and this is a kid who sees my club as a safe space to be, and he sees himself as a part of this club, and he can bring in his stuff, and he can be as nerdy as he likes, and it's fabulous, and I'm a bit jealous. And your nerds may wish to deviate from your chosen element of hobby, and this may cause you some confusion. So it was initially called the Hobbit Hobby Club. There are far more things now that I don't understand, because I only play the Hobbit games, and they bring in these Tyranids and these Space Marines and these things that I really don't get. It's kind of a cool chance for me to learn. The Dungeons and Dragons thing I really don't get. So we now have to have a separate club for Dungeons and Dragons because I've unleashed their nerd. And it's kind of all-encompassing now. There is a kids video, if you would like to see it. They made a little video for you guys. Obviously I can't have it on film because I had to get permission. I had to actually get a school-headed letter saying the Great British Hobbit League, which is really exciting. Basically sharing our wonderful hobby with the next generation is super awesome, and we should all do it. So if you are aware of a local club, if you've got any miniatures that are gathering dust in your cupboard, give them to a kid, show them how to paint, show them how to play, and they'll have an awesome time.
Thanks so much, Laura. And next up, we have Ben and Steve from Top Table Gaming.
How are we all? Alright. I'm very nervous because I've not prepped. Ben,
I wrote this, so he's got no idea what I'm going to put on here. So we just wanted to give you a bit of an overview of kind of the channel that Steve started up and I've recently joined, and just kind of a bit of history. What we're working on at the moment and what we want to do in the future. So do you want to...
What's that mean?
That is you. Go talk about yourself. I don't like doing that.
Yeah, well, most of you know who I am from GBHL and my hobby life. I've grown up with a lot of you guys. I started quite late in the hobby, and then I became a GBHL host with Damian, Tom, and James and Jamie. From there, I wanted to spread my wings into other systems. I started to do tournaments for GBHL. I wanted to do them on my own, which I did, with a bit of a twist. So I made a lot of my own boards and scenery and stuff like that. Where are we? And then I started Top Table Wargaming. Top Table Wargaming was a chance for me to explore the need to look into other games and go into terrain building and not just stick to Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, which I know a lot of you might hate me for, but I know. But Hobbit and Lord of the Rings has always been my main passion in gaming. It's what got me into gaming with my son when he was young, and then he grew up and discovered girls and drinking. And I carried on playing with toy soldiers as a grown man, so that was fun. But yeah, so Top Table Wargaming, that's how it started, and I started to do little terrain tutorial videos, which when I look back at now are very basic. But I really enjoyed it, and doing videos became my hobby. It's this community that enabled me to do that. So I've still got friends who don't know what I do, so one day someone will discover YouTube and me on it, and I will not be able to live that down. They'll be on the pub and everything. But yeah, this community is something that I have to thank all of you guys for, because it's let me find another side to me that I didn't have, and be artistic, and it takes me away from the stresses of life. So I run my own business. I'm very, very busy. I know you don't think I am because I make a lot of videos. But yeah, it's something that, like I said, I've come in too late, and I've run with it, and I think I'm going to keep running with it as long as I can, as long as you guys keep doing it. And yeah, that's, yeah.
I don't think that's it.
Buckle up. So yeah, so I spoke about how Top Table started. It got to the point where it was getting a bit of traction. I had quite a few subscribers, but I wasn't able to keep up with the videos and making them because of my busy lifestyle. And Jay Finnegan came on, on board with the intention of doing a lot more videos and a bit more of a varied approach, because Jay has been involved in the gaming industry and like retail side of it and working with gaming companies, etc. for a few years, so he was a bit more knowledgeable than I was, and he plays every game that you can think of. Well, he buys every game.
Yeah, doesn't necessarily play it, but
yeah. So Jay come on board. We do you want to flip on to the next one?
yeah.
There's only so much I can speak about Jay.
Yeah.
So he came on board. Jay now works at Element Games, which a lot of you know from Desolation Stockport and the War of the Roses tour. And at the back of Element Games, we were able to rent a studio, which has enabled us to put a lot more quality into our videos, which I hope comes across, because a lot of hard work goes into them. Stop shaking your head, Damian. He's just better. So yeah, we've got a gaming table that's on wheels that we can turn around, we can attach cameras to it, we've got lighting, we've invested all our own money into this, and it is basically just so we can do what we do, and we hope it's appreciated.
But just going back, you know, I have filmed a couple of back reps with you before you had the studio, and it was a case of setting everything up in the living room and then packing it all away again at the end of the day, whereas
all my wife got home.
Whereas having a studio has just meant that all the equipment is there, and as soon as you walk in, it's just good to go, basically.
So we've got the lights set up, we've got all the cameras, we've got top-down cameras, we've got multiple cameras on stands and things like that. We'll just try to be as professional as we can, rather than just handy cam, shaky cam, making people dizzy when they're watching battle reports and such. But yeah.
And just to point out as well, we've also got the Top Table Gaming community on Facebook, which is just like a small group that people who watch the videos or kind of just want to participate in kind of, you know, with us and things, they can sort of join in and have a bit of a chat with us on there. So do you want to...
This is Ben.
And Ben. Hello.
So Ben and Lee have now come on board, again, because we got to the point, myself and Jay, where we didn't feel we were putting out enough videos, and we were trying to get the community started. And the reason that we set up a separate community from the GBHL was just simply because we wanted to explore other systems. And I don't think anyone in GBHL would appreciate my Space Marines being posted up all over it constantly. So we got Ben and Lee on board to help with the output of content, which I think, especially Ben, has been smashing the Middle-earth side of it. He does all these different army reviews and book reviews and things like that. And Middle-earth is always something that the channel is going to champion, just because it's the game that we all play and we all love and got us into gaming. But yeah, I can let you take over and talk about yourself a bit.
So a little bit about me. I started playing SPG when it first came out in the first iteration. That's many, was it 2002, 2003? Whenever it was. Either way, a long, long time ago. Much like your son, I kind of dropped out of gaming altogether when I discovered Beer and Girls. And I didn't sort of really pick it up, and then one day I was watching Lord of the Rings on TV, and I kind of got that real pang of nostalgia. And I thought, do you know what, I'd really like to start painting again, because I used to find it really therapeutic, and I used to really enjoy the hobby side of it. So I picked it back up again about sort of November 2016, and I haven't looked back. I feel like I've really immersed myself in kind of the SPG world. Played in quite a few tournaments, play against you quite a lot. I'm quite fortunate that there is quite a few players around the Manchester area, so you, James, played against Jay, we've had played quite a lot by now. And even before I joined the channel, I was featured on a few of your back reps and things on the channel. I've also been on some Hotgate Gaming and places like that as well. So even since I kind of joined and started replaying again, I've kind of been involved with the YouTube side of things. So I was sort of really pleased when Steve and Jay asked me to sort of jump on board and help them out producing a few videos. So, things that we have been working on recently and the things that I've kind of been involved with over the last kind of 2.5, 3 months. So we've had regular Middle-earth, Warhammer 40k and hobby content. So usually minimum of sort of 3 videos a week generally will go out between Steve and myself. We've worked on a Seeds of Decay 40k narrative campaign. Ooh, 40k. Does anybody play 40k?
Yeah.
Cool, that's a few, yeah. So what we wanted to do with this is, rather than a lot of the back reps, again, the kind of shaky hand cam, so we wanted to sort of add a level of professionalism to it. And also, what we found was that they were quite heavy to watch, so there's always like sort of 2,000 points of two different armies just basically trying to smash each other. We wanted to bring something slightly different to the table. We both collected the Conquest magazines, so again, when I saw those, there was like a bit of a pang of nostalgia from the old battle games of Middle-earth. Does anybody collect the Conquest magazines? A couple of people? No? But, you know, we were both collecting, we weren't really doing anything with them, so we wanted to...
I've got a secret. I didn't want to tell anyone else collecting.
Yeah. But then I think we both like opened up one day, and it was just like, collected it too.
It was a moment.
So we started using that, and basically we wanted to start off because, you know, there were probably going to be a lot of people out there like us that weren't really interested in competing with 40k or playing in any tournaments or anything like that. So we wanted to make it a little bit more narrative and have like a bit of a story behind it. So we started with this campaign, and the first part was Space Marines land on a planet because they're forced to, and then they find that something's going on, and then we've kind of developed the story from there. And then there's battle reports which kind of lead the narrative. Now at the moment we've got our last kind of story, I guess, video. We've given options, so we're trying to get sort of some viewer participation as to what they think that the Space Marines should try and do next. So it's to try and almost make like a bit of a story out of it, rather than it just being this kind of, you know, two armies, they play against each other for no reason, that's it sort of thing. So we're quite excited about that, and it's something that we are going to look to continue doing. You hosted a painting competition with Tommy Sewell, who was a Golden Demon winner.
Really successful painting competition. It took me by surprise actually how many people were interested in that side of it, because it started out as a gaming channel. But I think after that, and the fact that I've had so many people messaging saying when you're doing more terrain videos, etc., I think we are going to explore the hobby side as well. So yeah, there's going to be a lot more of that to come.
Definitely. We did a journey vlog. We went to Warhammer Fest. We had a great time. Did anybody else go? That was a few of you. So, yeah. You got that Warhammer Hero, didn't you? Was that you? Give it to you, anyone. But
He's not wearing a medal.
Yeah, it's on under his shirt. But we did the journey vlog, and personally, like, a journey vlog is not sort of thing that I would normally watch, but actually the reception was great for it. So, you know, we're quite keen, and that's part of the reason that we decided to come along today. We're not playing in the tournament. Actually, we drove down this morning. We're driving back tonight. It's a 4-hour trip each way. But we were just really keen to sort of meet up with some of you guys and try and sort of get you know, the I guess, 7 stones out to a wider community. A lot of the people that are on the Top Table Gaming Facebook page aren't necessarily competitive people. We've got a young lad called Glyn, who is kind of almost anti-competitiveness, and he just wants to play fluffy themed games. So there's people like him that would probably not consider going to any other GBHL event, but this sort of event would really kind of tick the box for him, because it is more fluffy, it's more themed, and he loves that sort of thing.
I think there's a lot of people out there who don't actually go to events, so I think if we can try and get to events like this, and it was Warhammer Fest that gave us the idea because it got such a good response with the journey vlog. If we can get to events, I mean, we're not always going to be able to travel to London for the southern ones, but if we can get to events and do a bit of a video and show people how relaxed it is and how much fun it is, and it's not just about turning up if you're brilliant at the game, or if you're an awesome painter and you can win best painted. It's about the social side of it and the community of making friends, and maybe it will entice more people to come to events.
And I think, you know, some of the previous topics that have been discussed this afternoon have kind of really hit that nail on the head as well, which I think is great. It kind of ties into what we're doing. We're also looking to sort of have partnerships with other channels. So there is a channel that we've partnered with at the moment, which is Blackjack Legacy, which have a kind of, I guess he has a similar sort of ethos to Top Table Gaming. He's all about sort of being inclusive, but he tends to focus more on smaller niche games rather than anything sort of Games Workshop wise. But we hosted the Top Table Legacy weekend, that was back in March,
yeah.
Which is, it wasn't necessarily a single system. There was, how many games were played there? Loads. I think we had about 5 different.
There was 6 set up, but there was loads going on.
Yeah.
And it was an idea that was very hard to get people to get on board with. But it did, and it was a success, and people loved it. And it was about coming and, yes, there was mini events on, but it wasn't. It was a lot like the feel of this, but for different systems. And it was just, it was a brilliant weekend. There was demo games, there was Luke of Luke's APS was there, and he built a board in a day, which is just an amazing feat in itself. And people just, we're trying to get different people from the hobby, so YouTubers or painters or terrain builders, or anyone, anyone who's got a game to demo, just to get together in a room and have fun and do it, and share each other's ideas.
The social side of it kind of really kind of shone, really, didn't it? And there was some, again, like bleeding
it took some alcohol.
It did, yeah. I think some of us, especially if we've never been to events before, it can be quite daunting, especially when other people seem to know each other. Whereas this, it just, a couple of pints in and everyone was talking with each other. We had loads of board games going on in the evening as well, so it really can help break the ice. And we're doing another one in October.
Another one in October. One of the things that we never picked on, I just thought about actually when you were saying about putting it together, was we had a raffle like most events do to try and raise the funds for putting the events up. But you could buy raffle tickets, but a way that you could earn raffle tickets was by either playing someone that you've never played before, playing a system that you've never played before. You get that, you got tickets for free in the raffle. So it just made people sit down with people that they didn't know and possibly play a game that they'd never played. And it worked. People really got bored with it. Really got bored. It was great. We're doing that again,
definitely. And in the October weekender, there is going to be some Middle-earth.
So there's 2 Middle-earth events. A single day event on the Saturday, just like two arm. Well, we'll do 1 arm. It's going to be a low numbers, but then on the Sunday we do battle companies, which I'm excited about. I'm really excited about running a battle companies event. It's something that I've not really touched on as much as you have. So that's exciting. We're doing a 40k event. I think we're doing Kill Team on the Sunday as well as other games. There's lots of other games going on. James Baldwin, who a lot of you know, he's going to be down on Drowned Earth again. He was there at the last one. It was a great success. So yeah, we'll be doing that. There's more building going on with Luke from Luke's APS. He's actually doing a
build along, I guess.
Yeah, it's like a build along where he's going to show people how to make a small display board for their armies. And we've got Tommy Sewell, who's going to be hosting. He's going to be judging a painting competition on the day. And sitting down with people and just giving them advice at the painting table. So there's all sorts going on. There's a lot of evening entertainment as well, so that's cool.
We'll also collaborate with SBG magazine, so we played one of the scenarios out of the Tariel issue. We really enjoyed that, and it was great sort of working alongside.
I think it's the best part of it.
I think it is. Yeah, it was. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're really keen to sort of carry on doing that and working in collaboration with people, so that we found that some YouTubers are quite, I guess, insular and they just want to do their own thing, whereas we're a little bit more about sort of community spirit and sort of working with other people.
We've reached out to a lot of people. Just there's some people who've got back. Again, on the 40k side, some of you who watch 40k battle reports, witness SEO, will be doing something with him in the future. And like Ben said, other people have been a bit, no, we don't want to do anything with anyone else. We want to sit down and just do what we do. But we're going to keep pushing and keep trying to get other people involved and do cross-channel stuff. Just to get ourselves out there and hopefully get people on board. And the whole thing about Top Table is what I took from the Middle-earth community and how friendly it is. And that's always been the selling point for me when I'm talking to someone about Middle-earth, is how friendly it is and how the community is so friendly. And the social side is what I take from events. I don't go to events to smash my opponent. I'll take theming armies and I go for the Saturday night out quizzes and just having a laugh. And I tried the beardy stuff and it wasn't fun. I tried it once, never tried it again. But I'm trying to get people from the 40k communities to see that it doesn't have to be about that, and you can have fun and make friends doing it. So hopefully we'll get there.
But personally, if the community wasn't so friendly and welcoming, I probably wouldn't be in there. So I think that's kind of a sort of testament to it. And in the future, we're going to continue to bring regular videos for Middle-earth SBG, and it's a prime focus for us. We've got Battle Report in the bag at the moment, which is going to be going out fairly soon, so quite like the look of that one. We're going to be doing some scenery builds, including boards. Has anyone any suggestions of what they would like to see built?
Mario?
Yeah, I can do that. You can do tarot. But you built boards in the past, and people have obviously enjoyed watching those videos. With the new Hobbit Hole kit, I'm sure they will be featured at some stage as well. So we're looking forward to getting some work done on those. We're going to do playthroughs of supplement scenarios, so I've got a couple of bits in the works for that. So hopefully that'll be on the channel fairly soon. We want to do an SBD narrative campaign. Off the back of the 40k one, we feel that actually Middle-earth kind of lends itself to that. So we'd like to do something along those lines. We haven't quite worked it out yet how we're going to work it, but that is something that we are going to be working on in the future. Backup companies is something that's coming very soon, so we're going to have like a bit of a backup companies league going on, which we're looking forward to starting on. And we're going to continue Warhammer 40k as well. It's a bit of a slow grower for us at the moment because I must admit I'm happy to admit that I'm riding off Steve's coattails from some GBHL. You know, for me, my Middle-earth content, if I was making it myself and not putting it out on Top Table, you know, hardly anybody would watch it.
NGB, SVG.
Yeah, or late subscribers. But we know that 40k is going to be a slow grow because we're not known in those sorts of circles. But I think more that we plug at it, and obviously the more people that start watching it and sort of sharing it and stuff, then hopefully that will grow for us as well. I think that is it. So thank you very much for watching.
I think that's it.
Cheers, Ben, Steve. Great to hear what you're up to. I think you're very much leading the way on YouTube content at the moment, so we should give you a round of applause for that. That's right. The good news is it only took this tiny bit of betrayal to get there. So. And our last talk today is Adam, who's going to talk about chivalry in Middle-earth, I believe. Thank you. Want to get out the bin?
This is weirdly intimidating compared to the other seminars I've given lately. I'm not Adam Troke from Games Workshop today. I'm just Adam Troke, keen Middle-earth community member. I think that's probably my only disclaimer. And welcome to my presentation, seminar, talk, whatever it is. Sometimes late at night, when I should be painting or working or asleep, Damian and I will communicate via the Facebook message thing. And he mentioned that there was going to be a symposium. Thank you, Jeff. Sorry, I've got a really crazy throat, so I think it's actually the nerves. And I said, I've half written a whole bunch of essays. One of my dreams, I think all like nerds have weird dreams, is that maybe one day I can submit something to the Tolkien Society and have it published. That would do my heart some good. And so I jokingly said, I could totally do one of those presentations for you. And then did nothing about it, and Damian kindly let me go on it and just didn't mention it again. And when I saw him post all the list, I was like, I really wish I'd done that. And he said, well, you've got an hour before you leave. And so this is collected. It's slightly more light-hearted than the essay that it's built from. But one of the things I love about Middle-earth is that it has informed my life. This is 10-year-old Adam. Which is the age I was when I discovered Middle-earth. I grew up in a sleepy little village called Netley Marsh, and I spent my days literally scrumping apples from like the neighbourhood trees, stealing conkers from Reverend Biggs's back garden, and running away from farmers who literally would shout, "Oi, come back here, you ruffians," and such things. And so when I was 10 and the school I was in did a reading week, I was naturally gravitated towards a teacher who was reading a book called The Hobbit, which was apparently about adventures and other such lovely things. I chose it mostly because he was the coolest teacher in the school, and it shames me that I cannot remember his name. But like many of you here, I imagine, have that memory which is your first step into Middle-earth. My memory was this teacher with his big beard saying, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And immediately I was like, what in 5 minutes is a hobbit? And thus the journey began. I read The Hobbit 5 times before I read The Lord of the Rings. My brother had The Lord of the Rings, and he wouldn't lend it to me. He's 4 years older than me and beat me up rottenly when I was a kid. If this is on the internet, Daniel. And Mrs. Humphreys was an English teacher when I was about 12, and she loaned me her copy of The Lord of the Rings. And I genuinely believe I owe a lot of who I am today to Mrs. Humphreys. King Alfred came into my life because that's where I went to university. Big shout out to Winchester. And at King Alfred's University, I started to expand my understanding of a whole lot of aspects of history as I studied a history degree. We studied Alfredian England at the time of the Viking invasion. And suddenly all the names that were hearing were called started to make a lot more sense, because he doesn't have an elf hat. And then we did the Carolingian Renaissance, and I realised that Boromir is basically Roland. Shout out to history nerds. We looked at the European dictatorships, and I realised that I could probably do a whole essay at some point about the comparisons between fascist Italy and Germany and communist Russia, and Sauron and Saruman and the Two Towers. But most interestingly of all is I did a module about chivalry in Europe and how that originated. And it really set me on this weird course of looking at Lord of the Rings very differently. And I started to, as I would reread it and then the movies came out and I would watch it, I started to pick up on the comparisons and the trends between what Tolkien writes about and what I knew from history about chivalry and where it comes in. My life then took a really interesting twist, because I went to Games Workshop and worked in rules design with Alessio Cavatore and Matt Ward, who kind of, I think of them as like I don't like putting myself in the role of Anakin, but like Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi to my Anakin. We were discussing this on the way in, if I could be sure I knew who Qui-Gon Jinn's guy was, then I could put myself in as Obi-Wan, who's my favourite. Doesn't work. Suddenly I was looking at things in new depth. I thought I was quite a Lord of the Rings swap, and there was Matt Ward who just knew everything about everything, and suddenly I was like on the bottom rung of what I thought was a quite short ladder, and it was actually a big ladder. And then I had some opportunities to meet some people who really changed my perspective on how deep you could go into Middle-earth. I was on set this sounds like a humble brag, sorry internet. I was on set when they were filming The Hobbit and met the lady in charge of language, and so making sure that all the dwarves were pronouncing everything correctly. And had about an hour and a half long conversation with this woman whose knowledge and understanding of sort of the nature and the culture of the words behind Middle-earth. Suddenly I was like, oh, this is richer and more beautiful than I'd imagined. Also, they pronounced Dane the way I wanted them to in the movie, which was great because I won a bet. And then I had this stint in my life that probably is where most of you actually know me from, where I became the Dark Lord for a while. The new Dark Lord is sat in the room. But suddenly my whole life was Middle-earth. Like from when I got up in the morning, I would fret about things to when I went to bed. And now it's my hobby again. And it means that I do things like sit down at my computer and write about things like the 10 tenets of chivalry and why they are absolutely rubbish for Middle-earth comparison. So chivalry is it comes from the root word like horses, and basically it was a code of honour and or behaviour and or warfare that medieval knights were supposed to live by. Most of them didn't. Most of them didn't care. They just murdered people with axes and maces and swords and made excuses for their behaviour. But it became very, very popular in the 1800s to look back on the glorious history of particularly England and go, weren't they all noble, rescuing maidens and doing lovely things? And this became the commonly accepted and codified rules of chivalry in the 1800s. They were looking backwards in quite an anachronistic way. So you have things like, thou shalt believe all the church teaches, and thou shalt observe all of its directions. It was brainwashing for Victorian / slightly pre-Victorian people with like a weird anachronistic lens on the past. And I think, has everybody read those? You don't have to, because I'm about to delete a few. Because you can just draw a line through some of them straight away, because they don't compare to what we understand about Middle-earth. And I think Tolkien very astutely, and I would argue, does have a lot of chivalric value and uses that in sort of a allegorical sense with some of his characters. But we can just remove the ones to do with religion straight away. They just don't help. Suddenly what we're left with is 7 tenets of chivalry, which sounds way better than 10, because 7 is like a nice sort of alliterative word, it's good. And so I've taken out the bits that don't work, and there we are. And I believe that the principles of chivalry lie heavily in the text of the Lord of the Rings. And you see these acted out. Thou shalt respect all weaknesses and shalt constitute thyself the defender of them. That's a bit mad, isn't it? The idea that you observe the weakness in other people and then make yourself the defender of the weakness of others. Thou shalt love the country in which thou was born, which is kind of like an unpopular thing to say nowadays. A lot of people go, oh, you can't like your country. But back then in the 1800s, and especially way back then when nations were smaller and that they literally bludgeoned each other over things like flags, it was an important subject to have loyalty to. Thou shalt not recall before thine enemy, don't be a coward. Thou shalt perform scrupulously the feudal duties, if they be not contrary to the law. Duty is a recurrent theme in Lord of the Rings. It's actually my favourite theme in all of Lord of the Rings is duty. Thou shalt never lie, and shalt remain faithful to thy pledged word. Be honest. Thou shalt be generous and give largesse to everybody. Largesse is like being generous with your stuff. I don't even know why it repeats it, to be honest. And thou shalt be everywhere and always the champion of the right and the good against injustice and evil. And I believe that you can see all 7 of my slightly retracted tenets of chivalry played out in the Lord of the Rings. Example number 1, thou shalt respect all weaknesses and shalt constitute thyself the defenders of them. Aragorn is literally the exemplar of this. Not only does Aragorn embrace certain chivalric values in that he's like a king who serves his people, but Aragorn devotes a large portion of his life to literally protecting the weakest place in all of Middle-earth. Country bumpkins, which remind me of myself, and he acts as the guardian of that area. And then when it is his time to fulfill his duty, and he's called upon to start saving the world by Gandalf, he protects the hobbits with his life. Weirdly, he's not that bracer, but he doesn't get until he meets off Boromir in this artwork. I think you can look at Aragorn as sort of the definitive archetypal defender of the weak, if you look at Middle-earth. Thou shalt love the country in which thou was born. I think several characters in Middle-earth imbue this nicely, but Eomer, who is exiled in the movies, I guess he doesn't get that role in the book, but it nicely caps, also the numbers are wrong. I couldn't make it say number 2, I tried really hard. In the movie, he's banished and still wants to return and fight for his people and his kingdom. In the book, you could give this role to Pepper. And there's a strain of nobility and the chivalric value in protecting the places you were born. Now, shall not recall before thine enemy. Loads of people do heroic things, but none are more heroic than Éowyn. Éowyn was a strong female figure way before it was cool. And Tolkien really tells an interesting character with her. She serves her liege lord faithfully, she stands by him when he falls, and then defeats the greatest evil that there is to be defeated physically in Middle-earth at that point. I don't think there can be considered a better example of refusing to recoil. I shall perform scrupulously thy feudal duties if they be not contrary to the law. Boromir has a wonderful redemption arc that runs through his entire history. He has the weight of the kingdom of Gondor on his shoulders. His father is going potty, it hasn't escaped his notice. They're losing a long and grinding war against an enemy that replenishes itself unceasingly. And so when he attends the Council of Elrond, he is looking for the solution to his problem. He's not looking for a one-way trip with a midget and a piece of jewellery. He's looking for something that saves Minas Tirith from encroaching horror. And he makes a foul mistake. And for a long time, when I first discovered Lord of the Rings, Boromir was my favourite character. And the reason for that is it's what he does when he realises he's made a mistake. When he's done terrible wrong, he tries to right it as best he can by protecting the weak. He scrupulously performs the feudal duties of a noble, which is to protect the weak and the people around you. If they're being not contrary to the law, well, I'm not sure how that works. Thou shalt never lie and remain faithful to thy pledged word. This is supposed to be Faramir. And if anybody should have lied to save their neck in all of Middle-earth, it was Faramir. He should have gone, no, I have not seen the ring. And Faramir is considered by many to be one of the greatest characters that Tolkien wrote about. He's not in my top 5. But what he has in spades is integrity and honesty and the ability to do something that few people can do, which is genuinely refuse the allure of the ring. his word really means something to him. Giving gifts is a principle of the chivalric code. The idea that you should be generous with that which you've got. And another instance when the gift giving ties nicely into chivalry here is Galadriel, by all rights, could have been extremely rude to certain members of the Fellowship. Gimli specifically. There's a long-running feud between their peoples, and yet she shows generosity on an incredible level to him, and helps you to understand the importance of that. So, last, thou shalt be everywhere and always the champion of the right and the good against injustice and evil. And we have presented here Gandalf the White and Theoden riding forth to go and save Minas Tirith. I couldn't decide which one I preferred for this role. Probably it's Gandalf, but when Theoden stops being rubbish, he becomes probably the best character. I don't know where that puts him on the spectrum. We've argued a lot about it. But the idea that no matter what, wherever it is, you would oppose evil is a true tenet of chivalry. Gandalf probably, through his long, long years in Middle-earth, is the best example of that. So, all done and dusted, you would think, except that it's time for the clumsiest comparison in all of Middle-earth and the principle upon which my rubbish essay will one day be written, which is that up there, Helm's Deep to Minas Tirith is, according to the rubbish scale, about 300 miles, and that's how far Rohan ride. But they only have to cross like one river. Whereas from here, this glorious little province, come the true heroes of the entire story. Bear with me, the comparison gets worse before it gets better. This is my favourite photograph. I actually struggle not to be emotional with it on the whole internet. I understand it's staged, but it encapsulates modern chivalry. This person has travelled half a world to fight in somebody else's war on behalf of people who can't fight it himself. He is fighting evil and injustice wherever it can be found. And I've thought long and hard about the comparison between soldiers around the world who descend to places where evil is being done and sacrifice themselves to thwart it, and my curious love affair with the Prince of Dol-Amroth. He is the champion of the White City. He is the defender of Gondor. He sallies forth from the gates. In spite of family feuds, he does his duty. He is the champion of the true king, the kindest of uncles, and makes an at least 200-mile march. And I will now, in what little time remains, prove to you why this makes him the exemplar of chivalry in Middle-earth, and thus I will seem like a genius to myself. And it's not as weird as it sounds. So, let's go back, and I will now... So, first of all, here's the champion of the White City. It says, tirelessly Gandalf strode from the citadel to gate, from north to south about the wall, and with him went the Prince of Dol-Amroth in his shining mail. For he and his knights still held themselves like lords, in whom the race of Númenor ran true. And then one man would sing amid the gloom some staves of the Lay of Nimrodel, or other songs of the Vale of Anduin out of vanished years. Imrahil and his knights of Dol-Amroth respected all weakness, and constituted themselves the defenders of the weak. They stood on the ramparts of Minas Tirith against an unassailable horde. Defender of Gondor, thou shalt love the country in which thou wast born. Now they sprang forward, formed, quickened to a gallop, and charged with a great shout. And from the walls an answer shout went up, for foremost in the field rode the Swan Knights of Dol-Amroth, with their prince and his blue banner at their head. Amroth for Gondor, they cried. Amroth to Faramir. In like the most noble and true way, they were the champions and protectors of the nation that they loved. Thou shalt not recoil before thine enemy. And yet they sallied forth from the gates. But northward the white crest of Éomer led the great front of the Rohirrim, which he had again gathered and marshalled, and out of the city came all the strength of men that was in it. And the Silver Swan of Dol-Amroth was born in the van, that's the front, driving the enemy from the gate. A horde beyond number, and Imrahil and his knights are at the front of the charge. in spite of family feuds, the weirdness that is Prince Imrahil's loyalty to Minas Tirith. A little bit of from Imrahil's biography, such as it is. When Denethor became a steward in 2984, he proved a masterful lord, holding the rule of all things in his own hand. He said little, he listened to counsel, and he followed his own mind. He married late, taking as wife Findulis, daughter of Adrahil of Don Amroth, Imrahil's sister. Prince Imrahil is the uncle of Boromir and Faramir, and Findulis dies of loneliness, sadness, and neglect in the White City. You would think that would give a man every reason to hate the Steward of Gondor. And yet when word goes out for the Out Companies to return and protect the city, he puts aside family feuds and in fact performs scrupulously his feudal duties. He is the champion of the true king. As for me, said I might have made a mistake in my notes. It's fine. Yes, okay. So this is in relation to never lie and remain faithful to thy pledged word. As for me, said Imrahil, the Lord Aragorn I hold to be my liege lord, whether he will it or no. His wish to be a command, I will go also. Yet for a while I will stand in the place of the Steward of Gondor, and it is mine to think first of its people. Imrahil's claim to the throne, and thus like all of Gondor, was almost as good as Aragorn's, and everybody knew who he was, and he'd been there for months, and he'd been fighting very hard. And Imrahil is a dusty, muddy tramp from the wilderness. And yet he sees in Aragorn his nobility and is honest enough to acknowledge it. Generosity is a weird one. How do you prove that Imrahil is the exemplar of generosity in the chivalric spirit? Prince Imrahil brought Faramir to the White Tower, and he said, "Your son has returned, Lord, after great deeds." And he told them all he had seen. This may contradict the honesty of the previous one, but imagine the failure he could have put at the door of Faramir. He could have blamed Faramir for all the things that had gone wrong under Faramir, but instead he said to Faramir's father, the brother-in-law who he probably hates, "Your son has returned, Lord, after great deeds." He's the kindest of uncles. And lastly, thou shalt be everywhere and always the champion of right and good against injustice and evil. And last and proudest came Imrahil, Prince of Dol Amroth, kinsman of the Lord, with gilded banners bearing his token of the ship and the silver swan, and a company of knights in full harness riding grey horses. And behind them 700 of men-at-arms, tall as lords, grey-eyed, dark-haired, singing as they came. They marched 200 miles to fight in somebody else's war, when their home is on the coast, where it's probably quite sunny, and also threatened by corsairs. I don't know if this is pertinent to anybody else, but when I look at chivalry and the way it plays out in The Lord of the Rings, it inspires me, and I feel like as I learn more about the actions of the characters and the things that they do and the reasons that they do them, it makes me want to be more noble and to do better things. And so my love affair with a prince, as weird as it sounds, has been an ongoing theme throughout my life. And so thank you for letting me share just a little bit of that weird insight with you.
Laura.
Do I have to stay?
Awesome, thanks. Cheers, Adam. Same as before, got Ben and Steve and Laura to come down, and if anyone's got any questions for them about any other topics, feel free. We're not in a rush, the curry table's at 7:30. I could have gone for ages.
I don't use the other 14 slides.
Sorry, I've got a question for you, so you can go on about that for a bit.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, The Lord of the Rings, to me, presents a massive amount of black and white morality, which is miles away from what you see a lot of modern fantasy storytelling doing. Game of Thrones is the best example I can think of.
Sure, but everybody's a different type of a shade of grey, aren't they?
Exactly. What do you think to that comparison? Do you think anything's been lost by that move away from black and white morality?
That's a really good question. So I, Adam Troke, and not any other formal body, would say this. But I think the first thing that the Lord of the Rings does is it presents itself in a style which was traditional at its time. So you can see the villains and you can see the heroes fairly openly. Within that, it actually does present quite a few grey areas. Boromir, who should be, by all rights, like one of the strident champions of the story, almost becomes its biggest villain. Denethor's actually a good example. Kings are supposed to be noble and good, and he's racked by madness because he's tried to do what's right. He's tried to use the Seeing Stone to scry the machinations of the Grey Enemy, and instead he's had his brain ruined. Theoden is a shameful example of a weak king in his early rule, much as people like to sing about him. I think he follows a relatively weak king, and he's worse. And that's because he allows evil into his heart in a similar way to Denethor, albeit through different means. What I think that gives you is quite a few shades of grey from an... they're not as stark when we compare that to the Game of Thrones. But I think for their time they were certainly pretty good. The real question was, do you think we're missing that sort of obvious heroes? And yes, I do. I think it's good to have people to look up to who are wholesome and good. I genuinely think that, and I think that Lord of the Rings is replete with them. All of the Fellowship, even including Boromir, are like, in some capacity, a great example of a hero, whether it's just the courage and loyalty of the hobbits who follow Frodo on this insane quest. Everybody needs a Sam in their life. Everybody needs a Sam.
You're all welcome.
And if you don't know who yours is, just work really hard to be someone else's. Even Boromir, he's the perfect example of really badly doing it wrong and then trying really hard to do it right afterwards. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's...
Got a question for Lord, actually. Hi. So like obviously you run a school club for kids and stuff, I know they're quite a young age, but have you had any kids come in who have got like learning difficulties or social difficulties that have found refuge and learned from gaming?
Yeah. So obviously it appeals to a black and white mind. So I have a child in my club with autism, and he likes the rules. He likes people to paint things exactly as they are in the box.
Yeah.
So we've had to have discussions about that kind of thing. But it sort of appeals to that kind of the love of rule books and kind of reading things. So. But it's a safe space. It's a happy space for all nerds to kind of hang out in a classroom and talk about nerd stuff. So everyone compiles it.
Do you see an impact on like that particular student? Do you see any positive impact on their actual school work through being able to access that kind of interaction?
Quite possibly. I teach 5-year-olds,
Yeah.
and they are not touching paint in my
Yeah.
classroom. So maybe a little bit older. But so I think the just having other kids that like what may be weird to the masses, I don't know. I think there's definitely a kind of a little community that's formed. So they talk about D&D on the playground, they talk about the rule book that they've read, and they talk about playing Hobbit games at Warhammer and that kind of stuff. So I think it's kind of, and because it's growing exponentially, I think there's definitely a bigger community now of kids at school that all know that they all play with Toy Story.
Yeah, cool.
And I can be the chief of nerds and
You said you struggled to get girls involved.
Yes.
Why do you think girls don't like Toy Story?
I really don't.
The average mass?
Yeah, having talked to the girls that have since joined, some of them thought it was actual fighting, which put them off, which was interesting. And I think it's just that volume thing. So you look around and there are a lot of boys doing it. Just two of us here. And particularly when I started going to tournaments, I was the only girl in the room sometimes, and that's kind of scary if you're not into being surrounded by really nice boy nerds. But I think Definitely that scene is changing. I mean, I think going to the Throne of Skulls this year, there were several. There was a decent handful of ladies playing, and I think that's really good. And I think there are certain people in the community that are really championing that, and that's really important. So it's just about making it more accessible, isn't it? And having that sort of safe space where people can talk about their hobbies. And I've always felt like I can ask tons of questions and nobody treats me like an idiot. So it's really nice. It's nice, and particularly this community. Obviously, not all Warhammer communities are as welcoming and as super friendly and into all the fluffiness of things. And I think that's kind of why I chose that as the hobby club angle, was because I knew that people would appreciate the kind of ethos of the club and kind of play nicely with all the other kids.
One for the top table boys. Have you found that the enjoyment you get out of the hobby has changed since you started spending more time doing the channel? Like, are you finding that you're enjoying different things in the hobby now than you were before?
Yeah, definitely. The channel has become my hobby now, whereas it was in the channel now is what I do in my hobby time. So I don't spend as much time painting models as I used to. I paint now because I need them ready for the channel, and that's fine. It's taught me to speed and paint and batch paint, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge of it. Yeah, it's good.
I think much the same. Like I'm kind of more focused on getting armies finished and stuff, whereas I've had projects that I'm sure everybody here has got the same, but like projects that have just lasted for months and months and months, whereas actually I'm like, do you know what, I want to get that ready for that rep, so I have to put some really focus into it to get things done. You know, since I've joined, as I say, I've only been 2-3 months, but you know, I found that I've almost got it's almost like a new hobby now as well. Like, so, you know, video editing was never something that I've ever done before, but it's a skill that I've now picked up since I've started doing it. And you know, I'm only doing really super basic stuff, but actually it's something I really enjoy. So I still get enjoyment out of the playing and things, but actually, you know, I'm finding enjoyment in other things as well. So yeah, definitely.
Any more for any more?
I'm going to go for one. Adam, you talked about chivalry in the armies of good. But chivalry in the armies of evil.
It's not something I've particularly thought a lot about, because generally the armies of evil probably connect a little bit to James's question, are a little more black and white. I think you could make a really good argument, for example, crossing the streams, with chivalry and how it's portrayed within the evil houses, if you can call them evil houses, in Game of Thrones, for instance. Are there examples of chivalry? Well, there are examples to a certain extent of people who flout the traditions of chivalry, but it's not something I'm particularly worried about. We're not typically dealing with evil people who are, no, let me rephrase that, with people who are like openly doing the work of evil, who are also in positions where they would be chivalrous. Chivalry is traditionally the province of the nobles and like the knightly orders. So I don't think it's a major concern. Do you think we should look into it? Maybe so.
Got a counter question to
Go on.
Do you not think that, back in that point, that you can...
It's for you, Damian. Go on.
that you can, like you say about some great characters, that cannot a character make a chivalrous act but not embody chivalry themselves, so to speak?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Pitching Galadriel as having done a chivalrous act is a little bit of a stretch, because she's an elven queen and she's giving nice gifts, but it nicely illustrates the point that Tolkien is using gift giving as a really significant device within his stories, and there's lots of gift giving that goes on. The first really great instance of it you see is Bjorn's house in The Hobbit. I was quite impressed at what a genteel host Bjorn was when I was 10 and read that. I don't think you have to be a knight to do something that is a chivalrous deed, but I think often they're the best examples. But Lord of the Rings is replete with people who are doing noble things for noble reasons, and it's their motivation that excites me the most. Why does Galadriel treat the Fellowship of the Ring with such extraordinary generosity, but then not send an army with them? There's questions in there that I've enjoyed looking at and thinking about for years.
Following up on that, sorry, when you were going through your presentation, you had the list of all the super acts, I was trying to think in the back of my head what characters would fit all of
Mhm.
I'm not lying, he'll do come in, but I was thinking of Bilbo.
Mhm.
And what you just said, like, why does he do what he does?
Yeah.
For about going over 200 miles, he went all the way to Erebor to help the dwarves, just because it was the right thing to do. So would you say an argument of Bilbo would be able to fit into all of that?
So maybe Bilbo later on, it's still for you, Damian. Maybe we should just all say hi. Bilbo initially is, he follows along because he gets excited, because initially he's too scared, and then they sing the song and he dreams of treasure and gold and quests and mountain holds, and it makes his heart yearn to see those places. And then he wakes up in the morning and he's basically, it's crunch time, isn't it? And he's off he goes. Later in his adventure, really around the time of Mirkwood, Bilbo discovers himself.
Yeah.
With a little bit of help from a ring. I hadn't considered Bilbo as that. Does he fight evil wherever he finds it, or does he just have to? I don't know. And it might be fun in some ways to just take a character and drop the blueprint on them and see what sticks.
Yeah.
Would you say his initial, but with Bilbo, his initial actions, I'd say, were born out of blissful ignorance of actually how far away things are. When you've lived such an isolated, insular life,
Yeah.
the idea of anything beyond a couple of miles outside of the Shire, I mean, they even describe the border of the Shire as being a very far away place.
Yeah.
So the idea of anything beyond that is, it's only a stone.
Portrayed very nicely in the Lord of the Rings of Frodo and Sam leaving the Shire and Sam's reticence to do so. What I would say about Bilbo is, like his initial act, his opening act, is actually very chivalrous because he's generous straight away, like with people that he doesn't really want in his house, and he welcomes them in. I think it takes a long time before he does anything truly courageous, like really a surprisingly long time for the hero of the story.
Any more for any more?
I totally have questions for the other panelists. Am I allowed?
Yeah.
Panelist question number one. It was really interesting when you talked about sort of where you started and where you got to, and I wondered where you're going. What do you hope is, what's the dream of your endeavour?
For me, it's not. I've never really envisioned where it's going to go. I kind of just thought along for the ride with it. It's going really well at the minute, and I want to really see what it can do now. I'm going to do everything I can to keep pushing.
But much the same when I joined, it's, you know, with anything I do in my life, I want to make sure that if I'm going to put investment and time into it, I want it to be the best it can be. So, you know, as Steve said, just see where it can go. You know, if we can grow the channel and get, you know, a million subscribers, you know, be the biggest channel on YouTube. That's the dream.
If what that will direct.
Yeah. Not Owen.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's
And sort of a connected question, something you said during your presentation was that not all groups are as friendly and welcoming as the Strategic Battlegame community. And then you talked about what sounded like a really great event. How do you get the rest of the wargaming community that you're embracing to be like the Strategic Battlegame community?
So basically, just doing what we're doing. I sneakily try and draw people into Middle Earth. So first thing I'll do before you face them is get them to come to the channel. I'll be chatting in the comments on the videos, and I'll point them towards Middle Earth. I'll point them towards a hobby vlog. I'll point them towards a journey vlog, and I'll always reference Middle Earth events that I've been to in the community and how cool it is, and why that's the reason why I've stuck with it into my 40s.
And I think there'll be also within those communities as well, you know, you will get that kind of, I guess, toxic minority, which I guess kind of sours it for a lot of other people. But you will get those lurkers as well that just kind of read. Actually, when they see a bit of positivity or something like that, they might actually kind of latch onto that and want to be part of that positivity rather than kind of being part of that toxicity, I guess. And then, you know, as I say, we can kind of draw them into the top table gaming community.
We've found already there's people that came to the channel from either the live streams or the other systems stuff that we do. And the first thing you say is what everybody says when we spoke to people in the queue at Warhammer Festival. They were saying, oh, I didn't even know people still played it. Well, that was. You know, hello. And then these like, it looks great, you know, we're going to try it. And there's people who actually started playing from the channel, which is fantastic. Not John, but
I think the thing that interests me is, like, I was surprised when I joined in with the Great British Hobbit League way back when, that it was such an inclusive and welcoming group. And it it didn't feel like I was going to a tournament. I think possibly the first GBHL tournament I went to was your one.
You won best out.
That was well done. But it was that genuine sense of community. Like when we were talking, I drove down with Adam, myself, and Jeff, and we were talking. It feels like you're going to see your friends not playing a tournament. And it interests me because you guys are like right at the heart of that sort of behaviour and feeling. And I was just like, I wonder how you make the other parts of the community you participate in feel the same way, because that'd be really great.
Yeah, I think it's just try and not be taken by the negative side, really. Yeah, just keep promoting how cool this community is and saying how we want the community that we built on a separate Facebook page to be like that, and people really get on board with this.
I guess as well, that it's quite, on the internet, it's quite easy to get drawn into those kind of negative debates and comments, and almost you'll get people who kind of purposely try and almost wind you up things, and we're quite good about we'll post something up and also people get snarky comment back. It's just like, well, turn that into a positive and just put almost like a positive spin on it or something like that, and actually that kind of draws people in as well, and actually catches people on behalf. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think and I've seen that happen on the GBHL as well. When somebody's almost posted something a little bit provocative, actually the majority of people are actually post something quite positive back, and
it's funny to see, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great, and actually, if we almost try and do that within other communities, it would kind of turn it into more of a GBHL style.
Cool. For a couple of reasons. One, the stage invasion, but also more of time we get to curry. Can we draw it to a close there? And we have a whole evening of
no more questions.
Can we please put it together for James and Dan and Steve and Ben and Laura and Adam for one amazing. Before we do head off, you staying? Brilliant. Just before we do head off, we've got a few little other bits to do. One, thank you so much. A, for coming and watching, but also for the guys who did this. We came up with this idea last year. We sort of suggested it and had no idea if it would work. But I thought that was brilliant. I thought they were really fascinating, and hopefully you all did. So thank you for giving up your time. Shall we do it again?
Yeah.
Excellent, we will. It was amazing as well that of such disparate topics, and we said you could talk about anything whatsoever to do with Middle-earth. Fundamentally, everyone kind of talked about being nice. Like Dan was like, pick the armies you want, don't worry about winning, and James was like, I always lose, but it doesn't matter, so pick the armies you want and don't care about winning. And then Adam talking about chivalry, and Laura launching a club, and Steve and Ben trying to build a better community. It's just lovely, and that kind of encapsulates the GBHL to a certain extent. And I think it's not perhaps a coincidence that given the choice to do anything whatsoever, everyone talked kind of about being nice, which is wonderful. So well done to everyone there.